Assalamu alaikum. I'm super excited to introduce Oraan podcast to all of you. Your podcast is a platform where we're talking about money and women and breaking those stereotypes and taboos around how complicated and difficult it is to talk about money, especially being a woman. And I'm very, very excited to introduce Sabah Bano Malik, who is not only our content lead at Oraan, but also an RJ, an influencer, and a model. And she used to be a journalist. The topic that we're going to talk about today is around feeling burnout, especially in times like this when there is high financial stress, and what burnout overall means and how it is very, very closely tied to money. So, welcome, Sabah.
Thank you for having me.
As I mentioned, this podcast is around burnout and financial instability causing burnout as well. And I would love to learn a little bit about how would you define burnout?
So I have a very intimate relationship with burnout. Unfortunately, I feel like burnout for me is when you can't even think, if that makes sense. Like you've kind of reached a point of exhaustion that maybe you're not even acknowledging, but it sort of, manifests in symptoms like that. So like the first time I experienced really bad burnout, I was basically working this job 7 days a week for like 3.5 years nonstop. And it was social media that would go deep into the night. There got to a point where like I couldn't process really when people were talking to me. And I felt like, and you get in this loop where you're like, I'm the problem. But then you realize that you're so mentally exhausted that the reason you're messing up is because you can't really think. So for me, burnout is really this sort of, it's emotional, it's physical. My strangest manifestation of this was around the same time I had started doing stand-up comedy. And I had a performance one night where we have a video of it where at the start, I'm a little hunched over. And by the end, I was literally sitting on the ground because I collapsed like on stage. And for everyone else, it was scary, but I was like cracking up because I was like, I think this is stress. Like, I think this is burnout. And there was this older uncle in the audience who was a doctor, and he was like, you are not okay. Like, whatever you're doing, not doing it well. This is not a stress relief for you. Because I was like, comedy stresses, releases my stress. And they were like, no, you are stressed out.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's kind of like an all-around thing. What about you?
100%. And when you were telling your story, I started remembering my time, and actually as the first job that I had, that provided me a lot of financial stability. And that was the reason why I took that job. It was as an investment banker. And I used to work 16 hours on non-stop. Even on weekends. And the structure of those like high performing jobs, high stress environments, for the first year and a half, it was great because I was like, oh my God, I'm making so much money. But like I started recognizing that towards the end of that period, I was just not able to focus on any conversation. And I was not able to enjoy anything. I was constantly exhausted, and I kept on I was like, oh, there's something wrong with my body, and there's something wrong that is going on. Which I need to address with a doctor because oh my God, how can I 22-year-old be so stressed, right? But very quickly started also realizing that it's actually burnout. This is what it feels like. And what are my options to get out of it? Which also started making me realize that there's a very strong relationship with money and burnout.
100%.
Right?
When you just said that, I was going to say it's interesting because I think when people think, okay, you're earning money, it seems like, well, 50% of the battle's won, right? Because you finally feel like, okay, I can handle life. Or, for some people, I can contribute to my family, or I can do this and that. But at the same time, it's kind of like, yeah, but now I
Yeah.
depend on this and I don't want to lose this. And the financial aspect of it kind of keeps you rooted in something that maybe it wouldn't have if you didn't depend on it so much. And
Yeah.
in a way, like, enjoy it. Like, I imagine that was like a high power like
Yeah, I
job
love
where it's
it.
kind of
I
like
love it.
winning,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And so it does add to the stress of, so when I got my first job in Pakistan, I was not making enough money to work 7 days a week or whatever, but it was my dream to
Absolutely.
work in fashion and be a journalist and this and that. And so I was like, I gotta hold on. And then the bonus was my own money that no one else can touch and belongs to me, and letting that go. Like, when you recognize you have burnout, right? People will be like, you gotta let go, you gotta look out for
Yeah.
yourself, blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, that's easy to say.
It's tough to do.
It's very tough to do when you've gotten used to being able to do things.
So how do you manage that? Because I have very interesting ways that I managed it. But tell me about, like, how did you manage that? Okay, I am burnt out and I want to be able to take a break, which that means that I have to let go of something, of whether it is my dream or whether it is the job that I'm doing, whatever it is. I have to let go for a period so that I can focus on myself. How did you manage that?
One thing for sure I had to let go of was black and white thinking, right? And sort of like attributing it all to my own personal failure. And I think that's very hard not to do, right? Because we're all like, if our body isn't listening, who else's fault could it be but our own? And so when I left that job, and it was very hard to leave because I was like, who else is going to hire, honestly, like a fat late 20 something person to be in fashion? But I had to start thinking like, okay, I know I don't want this to happen again.
Yeah.
So whatever I do next has to be without these factors that led to me burning out, or what I have now deduced from my self-diagnosis of what the burnout was. So when I moved into my next job, I actually upfront. I mean, again, I'm saying this with the privilege of like a mom, dad who would have taken me in or whatever if anything happened. But when I interviewed at my next job, day one, which was a risk, I said, this and this happened to me at my last job. I'm not going to let it happen to me again. So like, if that's the kind of organization you are, like, there's no point in us even talking further. And it actually worked in my favor. I actually think with this job also, I was very upfront about like, hey, I think these are just things that help me perform my best. Again, it's a scary position to be in. It's not always going to work in your favor. Like, I've been lucky enough to work at places that wanted this sort of energy to come in. And then personally dealing with it is like ebbs and flows. I would like to hear how you're dealing with it, and I'll take some tips on that.
I didn't have that privilege. I actually didn't have the privilege where my parents would, well, in my head, I didn't have that privilege. I'm sure I also wanted a certain career for myself and a certain lifestyle for myself. तो मेरे दिमाग में ये था कि burnout हो रहा है तो खुद ही figure out करना है और खुद ही manage करना है ज़िंदगी. And one of the first things that I did was actually look at how much can I afford to do a downgrade in my lifestyle. And how much do I need to maintain a certain lifestyle, and accordingly I would go and look for jobs. But I think us period mein one of the greatest things that happened was also कि money management skills aa gaye. Income is not going to make you wealthy.
Yes.
It is about how you manage your money.
100%.
So that I think our banking में obviously रहते हुए थोड़ी सी समझ भी आ रही थी कि किस तरह अपने पैसे manage करने. So that is something that I started doing कि let's figure out कि savings किस तरह build करते हैं, wealth किस तरह build करते हैं, and then start looking for what are the other opportunities. And very similarly to what you said, right? Like recognizing कि हाँ ठीक है, high performing jobs में that was that's my personality type, और हमेशा मुझे उसी किस्म के careers में मज़ा आता है and I can contribute a lot more, but also recognizing that it is important to take care of yourself.
Yes, 100%.
And also figuring out how do you manage everything so that you are financially independent. So that was like a very eye-opening type of experience for me to say that, you know what, like I need to get better with my money now.
Yeah.
And if I don't do it, I will continue pushing myself to a point where I'm not being productive.
Yes, exactly. Actually, just building off what you said, it is interesting when people talk to, so we're both millennials or whatever, but I feel like our whole lives, it's like, so what do you want? What do you want to be? What do you want to achieve? And I think that one of the key things of handling burnout, especially in times like now, financial stress, this and that, is what do you not want? What do you not want to live like? And I think after I left that first kind of crazy job of, I was like, paycheck to paycheck is a lifestyle I want to break away from. And, obviously people get underpaid and things like that. So please, I'm not dismissing anyone's things, but I'm like, a lot of that control does fall on you. And I think it's awesome that you learn money management stuff, because I was still just sort of like, I don't know what's happening with my money. And then I moved into a much higher paying role. And it was then that I was kind of like, okay, I don't want to live like that again. And I don't want to be afraid of my money. For me, I think burnout financially, especially, has this kind of fear and stress and this sort of nonstop panic around it that I started experiencing whenever I felt like a threat to my money or like I wanted to move. So I would say right now, Pakistan's having a great time economically. I don't know if you heard, it's like all good, nothing to be worried. But I've started feeling a bit of like, those little creeping panics that I'm like, this is like symptom one. And then it's sort of, and it's not like, oh, my job is causing me burnout, but it's almost like this psychological torture you put yourself under.
External factors and variables that are not within your control, but obviously it affects you. Do you think when you talk about that fear and anxiety around money, do you think that is largely because of us being women? Or do you think that is general? And I'm not talking about current situation. Current situation is stress inducing for everybody, right? It's not the greatest time economically. The inflation is at its peak. The dollar rate is gone mad. So in terms of like when you were going through this process, did you feel that you were feeling isolated more because of you being a woman and you did not have that support?
In a lot of ways, yeah. So like, I'm going to say like, I'm a big like feminist activist, this sort of thing. But I have not been like, my mind has shifted to that if I wasn't a single Pakistani woman, this amount of financial stress I probably wouldn't be taking on if I felt I had some place to land or if I had someone to lean on this with. But I think as a woman, you try to talk about money and oftentimes you get dismissed. I mean, I can say even myself coming from a family where lots of people have financial knowledge, it was sort of like, yeah. And so then you kind of get in the cycle of like, okay, well, no one's taking me seriously. Somehow I'm responsible for myself. Somehow I'm smart enough to have to take care of myself, but I'm too stupid to ask a question. And I think that's a big problem with that. And then, sorry to keep bringing it back to this, but it's making me think that, again, it's kind of like you get stuck in this loop. And burnout most commonly happens the way we think about it, right? And the way we're thinking and how the factors are that. And I felt isolated and alone about money often. Even now, sometimes I feel like people don't understand the pressure. And, I'm 33. So like I've been working since I was 18. I've achieved a level of financial independence. And I've also been able to give back to my family when and if they've needed it or if they've wanted it or if they're just like, oh, wow, Sabah, thanks for trying. But to think that I can't do that going forth feels terrifying, right? Like
100%.
Right? You don't want to be like, oh, I was able to stand up for my family, with my family, and now suddenly like I'm alone again and I don't know. And again, like the whole being single thing, sorry to my self, but it gets scary because I'm like, dude, it's me who has to make this keep going. And if inshallah I have a long life ahead of me, oh my God, it's a lot of time to have to worry about.
But when you talk about that independence and you talk about that that feeling that okay, I am feeling a certain way because of my thought processes, but don't you feel that it's also how people make you feel? Like people make you feel you are not capable enough to be financially independent, or you're not capable enough to get the knowledge that you would want to become slightly savvy and to have that level of freedom to do whatever you want to do with your money, however much or little you have.
So the reason I'm trying to fight a smile is because my dad literally listens to everything I do, anything. So I know you'll listen to this. But what I'll say is what you kind of hit a nail on the head for me, that it's sort of like, okay, I'll come to him and be like, I am an adult woman. I'm living in a city separate from you. I have bills and this and that, but I want to achieve wealth.
Yeah.
Let's talk it through. And it's immediate dismissal, or just like, nah, like no one wants to take the time. And it's sort of like, you're right. So it's these external factors do kind of make you feel like, what am I missing? Like, am I not valued? Like, like, why is it that my building my wealth and my security is almost a laughing matter? I'd also want to flip that question back to you. Is like, do you feel like alone and isolated?
100%, 100%. And throughout my career, I felt that I've also been in spaces where they were largely male dominant. Like banking space is globally, it's not, you won't see that much representation. But every time, whether it was for my work or whether it was how much I was earning or how much I was saving or how much I was contributing, it was always questioned, or it was always laughed at.
Yeah.
That, it was almost like कि जो मैं कर रही हूँ वो negligible है.
Yeah.
बाकी सब जो कर रहे हैं, that is like, oh my God, wow.
Yes.
And I think it is a lot to do with how we are conditioned to think about money from the very beginning, right? And how our households are structured, especially Pakistani households,
Yes.
around money. Okay. And surprisingly, like women do make financial decisions for their household. Majority
All the
of the
time.
women do that.
Yeah.
I know my mother was the one who controlled the entire budget of the house, and so does she still does it. But उनको कभी उस किस्म का importance नहीं दी गई.
Yes. But okay, so what I've noticed, you leave all of this on your wife or whatever, raising the kids, school fees, this, that. And I've noticed, I'm not trying to say your household was like this, but I've noticed in many households, father has no contribution even to the conversation of this. It's not, if they're the main breadwinner, right? It's not something they're interested in talking about. But then when the bills come and there's questions, suddenly this person who you left all these decisions on is an idiot.
Yeah.
Suddenly you can demand answers and say, why did you do it this way? And it's like, well, where were you? Why weren't we doing this conversation together? And I'm with you, like, why isn't there acknowledgement that all of this is happening and who's actually like doing it? And I think the Pakistani setup of like, well, men go and earn money, so we've done our part.
Yeah.
But it's more than that, right?
But
Like,
I don't think that's Pakistani. I think that is the culture
True.
in majority of the households, especially
is
South
true.
Asian, right?
Especially South.
Because and that also causes a lot of burnout.
Yes,
'Cause,
because you're thinking nonstop.
That's what a lot of like, that's the conversation that I am listening to or hearing about on different social media platforms as well, right? Like burnout of homemakers and
Yes.
burnout of like young mothers as well. कि जब इतना pressure उनके ऊपर आ जाता है, especially around like managing the kids and managing the house and managing the finances, and not being a chief wage earner, that's completely fine. But that pressure on a woman to provide for everything and still not being recognized is that causes to the anxiety, and that also causes a lot of these very hard conversations to not happen as well.
Yes, and I was reading my mind. I was like, it causes this kind of self-doubt and lack of confidence that then keeps you quiet, because you're just like, all right, well, I guess people know better. I guess I shouldn't ask, because when I'm asked, I'm like lambasted for being dumb or whatever. Actually, I was thinking, I was just home for Eid. And like my mom was in the kitchen and I was like in there with her, and I was like, oh, do you want me to put this here? Do you want me to put this there? By the third time I asked I just had to open my eyes and like turn. And I think logically a 33-year-old adult knows where the spoon goes. I even turned and I looked at her and I was like, how annoying is it for you that like you have another adult in here who's literally asking you for everything? And she started laughing, but she was like, honestly, it's really annoying because no one thinks like how many times in a day I have to direct other people's lives. And then, I don't know, at the end of the day, be criticized because one thing I did wrong. Yeah.
But how does the current economic condition makes you feel, right? Like there's a lot of There's a lot of chatter and conversation around where the current economy is going. There's inflation, obviously,
Yeah.
बहुत high hai. There's a lot more other pressures to perform, to not perform. Like, how is that? How are you managing that right now?
Pakistan is such an unpredictable place that I'm always just kind of relying on us and our ebbs and flows to kind of come back to at least manageable crazy. And so right now, like I do like work outside of my job at 9 to 5, and I do like influencing and freelance writing and stuff, and I've like upped it very hard, even though I don't think it's the smartest decision when you are so stressed out to add more onto your plate. But I'm like, I feel like there needs to be a level of safety and cushion around me to feel comfortable in like a few weeks, if that makes sense. But if me saying this out loud to you, self-therapizing, it is not the way to handle it. And what I've been trying to do is like kind of forgive myself that like, okay, well, if you're paying for a little bit of convenience in your life, at least that's some stress out of the way. But it's like, for example, like, what will I do? Like, if I want to treat myself to a coffee, like, I'm gonna do it. Like, I don't think that that's gonna be the make or break of my financial future. But I also understand that becoming comfortable with looking at how I spend right now, looking at how I'm saving, am I investing? I think, like we were talking about, a bit of the burnout and the decision fatigue is like, I also don't want to kind of come face to face with finances, because if I have questions, I feel like I have nowhere to go, or I'm not comfortable getting uncomfortable yet.
ये जो थोड़े से stressful, troubled time होते हैं, these are also the times when your creativity can actually come into making really good decisions for yourself. But for that to happen, you have to make sure that you're not burning yourself out. You are allowing yourself to feel whatever you're feeling, to then be able to be slightly more creative. Some really great companies actually came out of recessionary times of bear markets, right? So there's a mix feeling that is going on, but I think it is at the end of the day, it is about how do you manage it. How do you manage it? How do you also recognize that while it is not apparent that there is a network available for support, there is. And it's about being vulnerable and asking for help and asking for those questions. And that goes back to like the whole burnout topic that we're talking about, right? Especially around finance. There is a network available for such conversations. These are really, really hard conversations, and there are spaces available. And we are doing that. That is the motive and the mission and the vision that we are on, to provide that space and knowledge for people to be slightly better at managing their stress around money.
Even this conversation alone, like I'm not just saying, but like it feels good to talk about it. And I think something you said in there was like how creativity comes out of this. I think there's a bit of, oh, you're burnt out, like get a manicure, like go get a blow dry or something. And that's not always attainable. But when you talk about like getting creative with it, even just acknowledging it and having a conversation with people. And we were talking earlier, isolation, lonely, you'd be surprised how many people, women especially, just feel alone in money. And you're right, it is something that people want to resolve this. Like we want to provide not solutions, such a technical term, but like provide space and platform for that as well.
And that's where your solutions actually come out of, right? Like when you recognize कि एक ही किस्म का pattern है, एक ही किस्म की conversations हैं, एक ही किस्म की feeling है. Somebody comes up and says that, you know what, there needs to be a solution around these problems. And that is how we are solving for at Oraan as well, right? But this conversation has been phenomenal. I really enjoyed talking about this topic, and I'm sure you guys learned a lot. And if you have any questions or you want to see this more conversations around burnout and finance, we can have Sabah back. Thank you so much.
Thank
you, Sabah, for coming on this podcast.
I had a blast.
Thank you.